I'm here on location to tell you the story about wastewater treatment practices. It began at this processing plant, much like one of the thousands scattered across the country. As a byproduct of the food production process, waste products are washed into internal holding tanks for processing. The problem began when water leaving the holding tanks for disposal into the public wastewater system was identified as out of compliance with DNR and local standards.
Well, we run our own compliance checks. I guess a lot of processors do nowadays. About a half dozen checks of our wastewater several times a day. And I noticed my ammonia compliance was way out of whack. You gotta head this off fast because it'll shut you down.
Wastewater compliance standards are very strict. If out of compliance, a business is told to stop discharging. One processor told me by stopping production costs over $900 a minute. Not to mention the negative publicity associated with water pollution. There are very few companies who are trained to handle this type of emergency. One of them is H2O TECH of Ozark, Missouri, where Gary Dunham is operations manager.
Each facility, as a rule, has a permit of some nature. If it's an industrial sector, they will have a pre-treatment permit. If it's a municipality or an industrial entity which has a full treatment system, then they will have to meet the criteria set down by the state or by the EPA for discharge of water quality. As a rule, when we're consulting on a situation or a problem, we've been asked in to look at the situation and make recommendations and come up with solutions that will be the most economical for their situation.
Within minutes of getting the call, H2O TECH first responders were packing testing kits and on the road. CEO Scott Frazier told me that H2O TECH gets calls like these from a variety of companies from all over.
Environmental compliance is becoming increasingly more complicated for our customers. You've got fish, beef, pork processors, you've got high-tech companies. Anybody that has a water treatment issue nowadays is faced with these compliance issues. We've gotten calls from Canada to Brazil.
Traveling through the night, the H2O TECH team was on site in a few hours and immediately began testing to determine where the problem was and what was causing it.
We'd show up on site, we would visit with them to see exactly what the specific problem is. Is it a biological problem? Is it a chemical problem? Is it a mechanical problem? And by visiting with the superintendent or the operators, we'd be able to narrow it down. As a rule, a lot of times what we get into is to keep the state and federal governments out of the fining or implementing any kind of other criteria against the facilities. We try to get in, make a diagnosis of the problem, and have a solution that we can present back to them and to the customer.
Testing is exacting. H2O technicians say that microbe technology is changing quickly, and new ideas and innovations in wastewater processing are happening faster and faster.
A large portion of the work is investigation because the people have an understanding of wastewater, they have an understanding of biologics as it applies in the wastewater field. They also have some chemistry knowledge and mechanical knowledge, and it's an ongoing situation in that there's always new technologies. You will draw samples sometimes, send them out to get a correct analysis of what's actually going on within the material itself, the wastewater. We take this material, we put it in quantitative amounts, and then we dose it with specific amounts or volumes of polymer. And by doing so, we can see what effect it has. We can make it the most cost effective because we know what material we're adding to it and the exact amounts. And we can sit down at that point and come back and give you a cost analysis of what the treatability of the water is going to be.
They were here fast, running their tests, walking me through it right alongside. They wanted to get me back online as quickly as possible, and they wanted to make sure they solved the problem, not just fixed it or it would happen again.
Identifying the problem is the first step. Correcting the problem and getting the operator back in business is just as critical. In Mississippi, testing discovered the problem at the processing plant was deficient BOD, the food source for the microbes that consume waste particles in the water. The prescription? 40,000 pounds of acetic acid loaded in an H2O TECH tanker and delivered overnight. That solved the processor's problem and got them back in business, but in the process of testing, H2O Tech discovered an even bigger problem. The municipality was out of compliance. Scott Frazier explains.
Yes, oftentimes what we have is a plant that was designed 30 years ago and is expected to meet today's loading requirements, and so the plant is just simply under capacity. We can come in with our programs and meet these needs of the current permits on yesterday's technology.
The problem at the Mississippi plant? Filamentous.
Filamentous looks like a hair under a microscope basically, but it's actually a living organism, and they reproduce in the stream and they become so concentrated that they inhibit one of the processes within wastewater, which is a settling process. They trap air and they trap material and do not allow it to settle.
H2O Techs call themselves wastewater consultants. Many of them have been operators in the past. They are passionate about water purity and their work, and they always look for an organic solution first.
We try to use as much natural material as possible without inducing any inorganic materials or any foreign materials into the situation. The more natural we can keep it, the more environmental friendly it's going to be.
As first responders, H2O Tech's initial visit is frequently to avert a crisis. After the crisis is over, however, CEO Scott Frazier says their role begins to change.
It's all part of an ongoing process. Once we've averted the crisis, we continue to train and consult on the project, ensuring that treatment efficiencies are maximized and that they continue to stay in compliance.
The Mississippi processor was back in business in less than 2 days, and the municipality now has a more effective process for handling their growing load. Problem solved with a simple phone call to H2O Tech.